Screaming is what I was doing when this thing. Yeah, let's just say for real. Almost. So I believe that we are live once again. Yes, we are. Welcome back, everyone.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about this, but my computer decided to drop off and completely, die in my arms for a few minutes until it came back. So my apologies. I hope it will not happen again tonight. So where were we?
Well, we'll just as the other video would just we'll end up probably get rid of. So we'll go through the introductions of Christmas Days Ex Machina. We are here with Jonathan Thwaites from Games, who's currently running a Kickstarter. At this point, it's still at 4 hours. It's at 1.568, so it's gotten more backers. This is I'm saying this in Canadian, so $1.569 million Canadian. Which I think is 295 in British pounds. And we were just talking about the fact that about Kickstarters, and sometimes dollar value doesn't really reflect as much of the success per se compared to backers. And Jonathan was just saying the fact that their previous campaign, Mythwind, which I do believe raised a little bit less, had more backers, right?
Yes. So it finished at 1.3 million Canadian. But it had 11,000 backers for it. So it definitely had more people with it. So almost 3,000 more backers for the Mythwind campaign.
Yeah. But in the same situation, you made quite a bit of money in Stars of Vicarios. But like I said, people like me who bought the whole thing, this could be they're very, very pricey Kickstarters.
Yes.
So yeah, let's go through it because your first project was it No Escape or was it something else?
Yes, No Escape was the first project that we did
You
several
did a preview for the
years
Dice
ago.
Tower, which they refused to put on. Long story. Go on.
So yeah, that was pretty much the start of Games, was getting No Escape going and launched and having a successful campaign for it, and really trying to figure out what we knew about Kickstarter and actually converting that into something that would actually fund a campaign, and try and put an awesome game out. And really, over the years, it's evolved into these significantly larger campaigns that we're running now.
Yeah. The interesting thing, and this is something, we'll be brutally honest. I mean, you launched your campaign, No Escape, at the same time I ran around. I think I was a few months after you for Brandon Ultramodern. But you actually technically, and let's talk with people who it's a learning path. We all kind of make our mistakes, but the first No Escape didn't actually fund.
No, it didn't fund at all, and it's really a story of a lot of bad and almost comical things happening all at the same time, that really end up making a complete and utter failure of a campaign. And part of it was definitely our own doing, and part of it was far beyond our control. So we had all of our advertising based on Facebook ads at the time. And the day that we launched was the day that Facebook turned off their entire advertising platform due to a data leak.
Jesus.
And so there was 3 days where we couldn't advertise, and those happened to be the first 3 days of the campaign,
Which is so critical, yeah.
which is the most critical part of any Kickstarter. And of course, just with learning as well, there were a few mistakes we made in the setup, and
Yeah, it was
not
your
as
first
good of
campaign,
it.
right? Yeah.
It was our first campaign. Everyone's going to make issues on their first campaign.
Oh yeah, my
Uh,
first campaign raised 10 grand. Thankfully, my goal was 9, but it's I had the also distinction of having the one of the first Canadian campaigns because Kickstarter only expanded to Canada in August, and I had launched in September. So it was very, very interesting because I was like, "Who's this? Is this Canada? Is that a country? I didn't know that." Now Kickstarter's everywhere, but that was back in 2014. That was for that one, so No Escape relaunched. Was it a year later?
It was 6 months later, actually.
6 months, not even that. Yeah.
Yeah. So we relaunched 6 months later. Had a completely redesigned campaign. Did a lot more research into what else might be happening at the time, what other campaigns might be happening at the time, as that was also another issue that affected us. And managed to make that that second campaign actually a successful one. And so that was really the launch of Oomm Games from there.
Right. And so that one that got released, and I backed that one, and then you followed that up. Was Icarios right after that?
No,
Was there another one?
the next campaign we actually did was also another failure.
Oh, I remember now. Yep, you're right. Yep.
Yeah. So the next campaign we did was Battle Bears.
Right.
And that one, because it had had such a good presence at conventions and everything, we decided to attempt to just print it anyway. And we have ongoing slow sales from that. And then Icarios was the next campaign afterwards.
Okay. And well, you had Last Man Standing though.
So Last One Standing.
Or last One Standing.
Yeah. Last One Standing. That was actually done independently by Brennan before he joined our team.
Oh, okay.
And it was done actually around the same time as No Escape. And
really?
then we actually brought on Brendan and Last One Standing and helped with the finalization of everything for it, and then put out a second edition of the game as well.
Nice. And then we get to Icarios.
And then we get to Icarios, yes.
Which was not called that.
No, it was not called that. It was called something else entirely, which we won't be getting into, as there are still ongoing potential issues with that.
Yeah, so suffice to say, this is one of those problems where if you are running a Kickstarter, it's really unfortunate where some people have claims that you think are dubious at best, but suddenly, what's the easier solution? I personally prefer Stars of Icarios. I think it's a much more personable, it's much more attached. It feels like a game name. The other one just like, was this a video game adaptation? I didn't know. But yeah, but that one raised 920,000 Canadian from 7,502 backers. And then after that, we followed it up. That's when we get to Mythwind.
Yeah, that's when we get to Mythwind. And Mythwind, Stars of Icarios was our first big success, and Mythwind showed that we could continue on with that and build off of it. And Mythwind was quite a bit more successful than Stars of Icarios was. So that's where we hit.
Yeah. Well, Icarios is not still Trump chain. I mean, 983. That's something to be proud of.
That we were very proud of Icarios when that funded. In fact, I remember Brendan and I were sitting in the office together when we hit the launch button, and we hit the point of hitting the funding goal in 17 minutes, and we were just blown away. We were completely shocked at how successful it was, and we immediately jumped on a live stream and started thanking everyone for it. But yeah, that was really showing that there was a niche that we could start diving into, that people were interested in seeing more development with.
Yeah. And so we had Mythwind. It's at 11,000, 1.3 million Canadian. As we were just saying, that the current Stonesaga has raised more, but with fewer backers just because of the costs. All three of these are cooperative or semi-cooperative, are they not?
Yes, all three of these are actually the brainchild of Brendan McCaskill.
Right.
So he's really been developing the more cooperative focused games that we've been putting out for the last little bit.
If you run another campaign, Like if you design a game or somebody else near you, are you still running it from Brendan's Kickstarter because that profile has been so successful, or would you run it off of another profile?
So what we're doing actually is because Brendan's profile is really showing the cooperative focus games right now.
Mm.
We're going to be putting any more cooperative focus games out on Brendan's profile, as that's more where the audience is already going to. And then we have a second profile that we'll be putting any other games out onto.
Now, is that your Oomm Games, or are you doing another one?
That's our Oomm Games one, and then we may even be splitting up further depending on how things go in the future.
Well, there you go. So tell us, like, what is Stonesaga? What is it? Like, what is it? I know it's a game, but
So Stonesaga is very much the idea of it's a survival crafting style game set in the Stone Age. And of course, it's a very the idea is that it's not necessarily here on Earth. There's mythical things occurring. There's giant beasts that are around that you have to try and figure out what you're doing with. But thing is, this isn't necessarily a combat-focused game. Combat is not how you're going to be achieving most of your goals. You're going to be achieving them through finding other means to do things. And you still have to survive in getting the different items that you need throughout the game. And it's very much based on the artwork itself. So the artwork is actually more important to what's going on for the game than many other games.
how so?
Well, for instance, when you're doing exploring or that, what's actually shown on the tiles is going to indicate what kinds of things you can do on those tiles. So for instance, if there's a plains area, you can go through seeing things in the plains deck. If there's a river, you can go fishing in that area. If there's a cave area, you can go and search through in the caves and that. So what is actually shown on the tiles themselves greatly affects what you're actually able to do in the game. And so if you're looking for specific things, you need to look for the artwork clues.
All right. So, Paco, I've been talking for like 20 minutes. You got to have a question at this point. You've been stewing over. You must have a doozer back there.
Yeah, I do. And one of the things I wanted to ask is, and this may be a very silly question for somebody who's done this already, but one of the things I noticed is that you had a $69,000 initial goal, or euros, whatever this is telling me, because Kickstarter converts the currency. So it says, yeah, you had a. I mean, this is going up a lot, by the way.
Well, down to the last 4 hours, so you got that last surge going up.
Yeah, but I can see the thing running, which is very exciting, I have to say. But anyway, you had a target of originally. Let's find out what this thing tells me, of 100,000 Canadian.
Yeah.
How do you plan for 10 times or 11 times more money, stretch goals? I mean, doesn't it get to a point where you think, I don't have anything else that I thought about for stretch goals? Help? How does that work?
Well, we have actually run into that in the past before. We actually ran into that with Stars of Vicarios, where we went through all of our stretch goals very quickly, and then we started throwing out ideas for new stretch goals to add in. In some ways, it's almost like we threw everything, including the kitchen sink, in there, which ended up in the end not being a good way to do things. It added a lot of extra costs to the game. It delayed fulfillment by an additional amount. So what it ended up being was the best idea was a lot more slow progressive planning in the beginning. Having everything that we'd like to have put into the game, but really figuring out what the minimum product was to begin with, and having everything planned out based on that. So as much as we want to put everything out that is in the stretch goals, we also have to keep in mind all the different issues that are going to be coming along with that, such as increased box weight, which is going to affect your shipping. The length of time in manufacturing that this might cause, different things like that. So while most of these stretch goals are actually fairly small overall, we need to plan out ahead of time what we realistically thought we'd be able to raise over the course of the entire campaign and plan the stretch goals out according to that. With the idea being that we didn't want to be needing to come up with anything new because we've run out of stretch goals. So it was a whole lot of planning ahead of time and taking all of those learnings that we've had from our previous campaigns and really trying to put them out into a map for the entire campaign.
That's fair enough indeed. And the second question I have, which I don't know how easy or hard this is going to be to answer, to be honest, but I will ask it nevertheless, is I know that the theory is that at some point games are going to go into distribution once the backers have got their games. But have you found that games are sold as much when you have thousands of backers compared to if you have just a few hundred and then release a few games on distribution? Does this mean that, for example, right now you have 8,222 backers, that you're going to have a lot fewer sales when it hits distribution, or you haven't found a difference between one or the other?
So we actually struggle a lot with distribution after the Kickstarters, and that's one of the things that we're still trying to tackle on an ongoing basis. So we have certain games that that sell year-round, even after the Kickstarter. No Escape actually still sells year after year, and it's an ongoing sale for us. However, it's not large amounts of sales at a time. For the last few Kickstarters we've run, we've had large initial orders shortly after the game releases, and then it peters off quite quickly. And I see we just regained Chris back here.
Yes.
Happened. It wasn't even a reboot. I just got kicked off for no reason. Sorry. I could keep going.
And so since we've only had Stars of Vicarios out for realistically a few months, how ongoing sales are going to be happening for it is really something we're still in the process of figuring out. So the whole ongoing sales model after the Kickstarter, we are still very, very much trying to iron that out and figure that out, and really find what the best models are. And that's something that is definitely ongoing learning for us.
That doesn't mean that, and I would be very surprised if the answer were no. You having had enough interest from people from other countries to actually translate and publish the game either in Spanish, in French, in German, in other languages. Does that happen, or is it something that you also find in that because the project is so huge, they don't bother approaching?
So this is something where we have actually started working with someone else to help us with this. So we actually work with Mob Vanguard now. And what they do is they actually try and reach out to other publishing companies in other countries to try and set up localization deals for us. So they're really the go-between for us to try and help set up those deals because it's very, very hard to try and do that ourselves. And we have tried to do that. We tried to do that for No Escape. We tried to do that for Battle Bears. We even tried to do that initially for Stars of Vicarios. Stars of Vicarios, we actually paid to get all the translating done ourselves and then just ship out to those regions. So ever since we've brought Mob Vanguard on, things have actually been a little bit easier in that they're actually setting up these localization deals for us, and it's actually becoming a lot easier for us to expand out in that way.
That sounds. And how is that going? I mean, are you finding good international acceptance of the games, or is it still a struggle to get through? How is that working out?
It's pretty good. It really comes down to who's interested in it in
Right.
the end. So we have some areas, some languages that we'd like to get into because we know that there's fan interest there,
Mhm.
but we don't have any specific localization deals yet. Whereas we have other areas where they've completely come out of the blue for a localization deal for a language or a country that we weren't expecting at all. So it's hard to predict, but it's also quite exciting to see.
Good. Well, let's hope that the languages keep coming. That will be a very good sign indeed. Chris, over to you.
Have there been has the process? I mean, obviously, you know that there has been shifts, from No Escape even to Stars of Icarus. There was a definitive shift, a learning process. But has how Kickstarters are run in just the last year shifted?
In the last year, not quite as much of a shift. The biggest shift actually that we found that really changed Kickstarter for us was when Kickstarter put in the pre-launch follow. So when you could put up just a very quick preview, which was essentially just your banner with a very quick description and the follow button. That we actually found was the biggest shift for us that allowed a lot more going on for Kickstarter. Because once people were following on the Kickstarter platform itself, as opposed to following along on our emails, we've actually found that we've had a lot more people backing the campaigns.
Because you're looking at my last campaign, and then looking at the way this campaign, and then of course I was following the Elden Ring campaign that launched at the end of last year. And how long was the Stonesaga campaign in total? How long was it?
Stonesaga was 21 days.
So it wasn't even a full 30-day campaign.
No.
Elden Ring was what, 10
Yeah,
days?
I think so.
And yeah, and it's for me, I started to notice that how much the campaign, because back when you and I had this conversation, I think the last time we did a roundtable, you and I, we talked about the fact that 30% of your campaign funds are raised in the first 3 days, 30% in the last 3 days, and the rest of it is in the middle. But now it's looking like it's about 70% gets earned the first 3 days, 20%, and then if you're lucky, maybe 10% in the intervening days.
That is actually one big change that I noticed with this campaign in particular. We did probably around 50% of our funds in the first 3 days.
Yeah, 'cause you cracked 1 million in that.
We cracked 1 million in, I think it was day 4 or 5. I'd have to go back and check.
Yeah.
So it
I thought it was sooner
was
than that, but okay.
So it was. I've got it in my notes
Yeah, find my
somewhere. I just
notes.
don't have them up right now. And yeah, this was actually a campaign that I was taking a lot of notes about, because one of the big things that we're trying to do is make sure that the success that we've had from this campaign and the previous 2 campaigns we can replicate on a regular basis. So this campaign, I was very much on the sidelines taking a lot of notes about how everything happened, what was working, what wasn't working, with the whole idea that every campaign moving forward, we can try and replicate the success.
Yeah, because it seems like, once again, that I did the same thing. All my launches up until Amethyst was all like, "Hey guys, it's launching in a week. Here you go." And then I blasted out to my mailing list, and we're like, "Oh, we'll make 20,000, and then I'll make another 40 or 50 for the next week, and then I'll make a huge chunk." I'll make more money in the last 3 days than I did in the first. But then when he had Amethyst, it was a massive surge. It was $40,000 in a day, and then like after 72 hours, it just hit a brick wall, and it moved $10,000 the next 20 days, and I'd only got 30,000 in the last 72 hours with that last push. So now it's looking like, which is what I think Elden Ring did, is like there's this dead zone in the middle that's getting worse and worse, and now it seems like people are only responding to hype, which is either the end hype or the pre-hype. And now it's going point, like if it's a pre 72 hours and a last 72 hours, make a middle 72 hours, and that's it. That's what Elden Ring did. But they cut out that glut completely and say, hey, it's the last 3 days. They go, yeah, but it's only been running for 10. But no one really tracks that.
Yeah, and that's definitely one thing, is that people aren't really tracking that in between time. The campaigns are very much based around the hype itself. Campaigns are very, very intensive to keep going because you need to keep that hype going. If you don't keep that hype going, you start getting people backing out the campaign very quickly. And so you have to build a campaign based around keeping the hype going the entire time. And so Elden Ring did it where instead of trying to keep the hype going over an extended period, they just shortened that period, and the hype was for just that period because of that to an extent.
Yeah, they literally never tapered off.
Yeah. We were trying to do it where we have previews coming out over different periods. We have the stretch goals stretched out in such a way to try and help people build towards it. We have different events and information coming out with new information and new stuff throughout the campaign. So it's a different strategy that we approach, but still very much the same goal of keeping the hype going as much as possible during the campaign, which is the only way to really keep the campaign going at this point in time.
Yeah, I also want to see, looking at it, we're at 5. It's like, call now and give for the pure children. We've hit 1.573. Only your donation can get us to the 1.6. So anyway, the bet, by the way, and this was the funny thing, was the fact that a couple of weeks ago, Paco and I had what was his name? Chris from Modifius.
Yeah, Chris Birch.
Chris Birch from Modifius, wonderful guy, and he launched his Homeworld campaign at the same time, basically on the same day as you, I think.
Yes.
And they had an IP, which is different, and which means that other side companies, like both Gearbox and Blackbird Interactive and a few others, were able to blast the promotion of this campaign. Currently, the Homeworld Fleet Command it's at 4 days, so they're running a bit more of a traditional campaign. They got to, I think, what did they get to? They got to 300. I don't remember what they got in the first.
Right now, they are on, I'm going to say euros because that's what Kickstarter is telling me, 467,424 euros. And it's going up. And it's got 4 days to go.
So in Canadian, they crossed 672, which is, I might want to add what I predicted. I said they were going to cross 600,000, but then I said Canadian, and Paco's like, oh, that's nothing. But we had this little, it wasn't a bet, but we were having a conversation of which one was going to raise more, Stonesaga or Homeworld. And I remember Paco saying specifically, the way he implied it, that he believed that Homeworld Fleet Command would raise more, and I said I think it was going to be Stonesaga, and I didn't. I go like, well, I guess we'll have to see. So here we are nearing, like you're 4 hours. They got 4 days. Pretty sure they're not going to make up $1 million in the next 4 days.
No, I don't think so.
But like that being said, 672,000 is nothing to be ashamed of. I would absolutely.
I mean, they have a beautiful campaign page that they set up. They have a wonderful video that they have there. They've done all the right things as far as setting up the campaign page itself.
Yeah.
The one big difference that I'd say that they did versus what we did is the amount of pre-advertising that we did compared to them, and the amount of preview videos that were done compared to them. So that's where I think our campaign is actually doing better, is just the amount of pre-work that was put into it.
Well, which is funny you said that too, because I didn't know much about Stonesaga until basically a day before it launched. I was getting blasted with homeworld stuff for 2 weeks, going, when the heck is this thing launching? After you launched, it was every third ad on Facebook was a Stonesaga. I'd stopped seeing homeworld ads. I still see Stonesaga ads. I don't see homeworld ads anymore, which I find very, very interesting. So it's, yeah, you're right. There's obviously a different shift on how they do things.
So, and that's one of the big things that we've found, is that really having the successful Kickstarter, it takes a slow buildup of about 6 months of slowly increasing your advertising, slowly releasing more information, putting out those dev blogs, putting out video information. And it really takes a lot of dedicated time commitment to be able to build up towards that Kickstarter.
Which brings up another question, and this is not something we'll go into huge detail. I only got 2 more questions on this list, but we were just talking about this last week, that several high-profile game companies, Holy Grail, for example, just closed up shop. And I'm sure you're not unaware of the fact that Into the Box just exploded as well recently. They're doing it rather dramatically. Holy Grail is doing it much more respectfully. And are these things surprising? Have you been in situations where you understand where these situations where you can be as successful as these games companies are and still lose?
Yes, this is actually something that I can fully appreciate and fully understand. One of the advantages that we have that most companies don't is we actually have funding. We have someone that is essentially providing the financial backing that we need to get through the hard times and help us to be able to get onto a more successful product and be able to have the time that we need to pay back the loans that we have. If we didn't have that, we would likely be in the same position. Because even with games that we've had, where Stars of Vicarious, for example, perfect example is actually Stars of Vicarious, where we launched it right at the very beginning of the pandemic. And then between the time when we launched our campaign and we actually put the game out and got into people's hands, the cost of everything more than doubled. So the manufacturing costs went significantly up. The transport cost from China to everywhere went up by about 5 to 6 times the original projected amount. All the costs involved in it increased significantly. And we were left with the hard decision of, do we go to the backers and say the money we raised is not enough? Or do we go to our financial backer and say we're going to need to go into the red for a while until we can pull ourselves out? Right. And we fortunately had the option of going number 2. And most companies don't. And even the companies that decide, well, they'll take the loss and they'll try and make it up on the next one.
Well, make it up on the backside with distribution and stores.
Yeah, make it up on the backside. Well, now you're behind, and you're trying constantly to get ahead. And even if you have another successful Kickstarter, that doesn't mean you've raised enough money to carry out what you need or cover all the costs that you have outstanding from your previous Kickstarter. And so all the changes that happened in 2020, 2021, they were a huge hit to the industry. And other companies that do the same style that we do, which is primarily Kickstarter right now, and trying to slowly work our way into distribution, we're the companies that were the hardest hit by it. And so companies that already had loans out, already had other things they were doing, that were trying to float the next Kickstarter based on the previous Kickstarter. It's hard. It's very, very hard to be able to maintain that when there's big changes in the industry.
So what is next? What do you have brewing in the background?
So we have a few things coming up. The next big thing that
I don't care about Stonesaga. Stone Saga's yesterday's news.
Oh, Stonesaga.
I want to know.
Already. I mean, it's 4 hours ago, but it's past.
Exactly. No, that's like blue watches in Japan. It's black this year. Blue is last year, and that's why the blue. Yeah. So what is on the docket? What's on the schedule?
So the next thing that we actually have planned is Stars of Vicarios version 2. So this is going to be not only a updated rule set and campaign book for everything, with some streamlining of the rules, clarification of the campaigns, a little bit of changes to make things easier. But the biggest thing for it is actually the first expansion for Stars of Vicarios. And this is actually going to be a mini campaign that is set in between the prologue and Act 1. And
oh, really?
Yeah, so it's something that is going to be taking place during that time period where you have escaped, but you're not quite on to the next area that may be helpful for you or may not be helpful for you without giving away anything about the campaign.
Exactly. Because some of us, wink, haven't actually haven't sat down to play the game. Although I'm painting the models, but I'm not finished yet, so I have nothing to show yet. But hopefully, next 2 weeks or so, I'll actually be able to show that off.
And so, one of the big things with this is because of where it's situated in the campaign, you can either play it just as a separate thing all by itself, play through that, or you can play it and it'll actually add in a few new mechanics for the campaign moving forward. So it'll actually affect the rest of the campaign for you if you want to replay from that point on as well.
Will there be an upgrade kit for the people who had Stars of Vicarios 1?
Most definitely, yes. There will be an upgrade kit. That's one of the things that we're trying very, very hard to make as easy as possible for people to get, so that once you already have your first edition game, you can just get the upgrade kit to the second edition and you're all ready to go.
That's fantastic. I don't know if we'll wait that long. We may be like, oh, we'll just restart it or what have you. But it's beginning. Obviously, pandemic has been getting difficult to get people together into a room.
Mm-hmm.
And so that anything else, or is this? That's all you're willing to talk about is the follow up to Vicarios.
That's all we can talk about right now. We have definitely a few things on the go, but those ones we can't talk about quite yet.
No, darn. Are you thinking of expanding into other fields, like outside? I mean, we've played with you and I are both on the app bandwagon. We've talked about app integration for a while. We're both the people who have been supporters against a lot of people who have been really much reactionary. And you have app integration with Vicarios, correct?
Yes, we do.
Are you